Okay, recording's going.
Okay, welcome everybody to the Town of New Canaan Town Council regular meeting for Wednesday, September 16, 2020. It is 7:03 p.m. and this is a virtual meeting on Zoom and also broadcast live on channel 79. I'll begin with the agenda is posted on the New Canaan.info website on the homepage. It's got a link to our agenda. With that, let me ask you all to rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Will be led by the troop from Troop 7, James Ball and Trepanier. Gentlemen, would you like to lead us in the pledge? Whenever you're ready.
I pledge allegiance
to
the flag of the
United States of America
and to the republic
for which it stands,
one nation,
under God,
indivisible,
with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, gentlemen. Would you like to say a few words? I guess I'll begin with James. Say a few words about Troop 70 and what it's like to be a Boy Scout this past year.
Yeah, so earlier in the pandemic, we did campouts family by family. So one family did a camp out at their house and then another family did it at their house. And then every night and every morning we had a Zoom to say, this went well, this didn't go well. I maybe could have done this better. And we have recently, last week, we just had our first socially distanced meeting, which was nice to see everybody, and yeah, that's what we've been doing.
Are you getting training on things like knot tying through Zoom, or is that the kind of thing that we can do one-on-one?
I mean, yeah, you can do it one-on-one, socially distanced, and yeah.
And do you have any plans for spring camping or winter camping?
Well, yeah, so in October we have 2 campouts planned. So
Ward Pound Ridge.
yeah, one is in Pound Ridge and then one is on Candlewood Lake.
Great. Well, it's good to hear that scouting is alive and well during the pandemic when so many other activities aren't continuing. I believe we have another Boy Scout. Let me see. Nathan, are you with us?
Yes.
A few words?
Well, basically what he said, the first few, we instead of going out and camping as a troop, we just did backyard camping with check-in Zooms. We had Zooms every Thursday, I believe. But we tried a new idea where we all social distance and wore masks, and I would hold a phone and have a Zoom meeting running, and we could do a social distancing troop meeting. I'm going to be the Scouts webmaster this year.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you, Nathan. Thank you, James. And if there's nothing further, I think we'll open up the meeting. So with that, can I ask Vice Chairman Rich to take the roll? You're muted.
How's that? Is that better?
Yes.
Tom Butterworth,
Here.
Liz Donovan, John Engel,
Here.
Ben England,
Here.
Steve Carl,
Here.
Robin Bates Mason,
Here.
Mark Jimsky, Mike Morrow, Maria Naughton,
Here.
Christina Ross,
Here.
Rich Townsend, here, Penny Young.
Here.
You have a quorum
Of 9, is that correct?
of 9.
Okay. Thank you. So the meeting is called to order. First on our agenda is the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes for the July 15th, 2020 regular meeting? I think I see Penny waving a finger. Steve Carl seconds it. Any discussion on the minutes? Okay, there being none, raise your hand and, raise your hand and let's count some hands if you approve the minutes. So John, Penny, Steve, Rich, Robin, Thomas, Christina, Sven, and Liz. Oh, I see Liz raising her hand. Okay, great. I can't find so many people. I can't find Maria.
I'm here. I raised my
Oh,
hand.
there you are. Okay, in the middle of my screen. Okay, the minutes pass. Good thing we don't have to vote on anything else tonight. Okay, the minutes pass. Public comments. Members of the public are welcome to speak to the town council on agenda topics scheduled for review and/or vote. Speakers are requested to provide their name and street address, and comments will be limited to 2 or 3 minutes, subject to the total number of speakers. I think several of you want to speak, so several of you indicated so in the chat room. If you don't want to do it in the chat or you don't have the capability of chat, you can just let us know when we get to the end of the list and we'll add you verbally. So first on our list is Mimi Findley, I believe of Father Peter's Lane. Yes? Nope, you're muted. Let's see if we can unmute. Nope, you have to unmute yourself, Mimi.
Hey, John, which one of us wants to be timer? Is Sven gonna do timing or who wants to do the timer?
I think of you as the enforcer, Steve.
Oh God, really? Come on.
You're like the sergeant at arms in the Little Rascals, you know, the guy with the stick.
All right, so 2 minutes and we'll be a little liberal on the 2 minutes, but not very liberal. How's that?
Okay,
Thank
Okay.
you. All right, are we ready
yes.
to go? Okay. I'm going to be reading my presentation here. It's about the library and the architect, Alfred H. Taylor. And I have the first 3 things you to know about Alfred H. Taylor. First, he was born in Hoboken, New Jersey in 1866 to English-born parents. Father was a superintendent in a dry goods store. By 1880, they'd moved to Manhattan's Upper West Side. Alfred and his younger brother were in school. Older brother was a dry goods salesman, as was his father. 18-year-old sister was at home. Number 2, at 18, Alfred started working with the New York City architectural firm of D&J Jardine and stayed there 12 years before establishing his own firm in 1896. Although he was listed in the New York City directories by the age of 23 as an architect with an office on Broadway and a house on Upper 7th Avenue, now Martin Luther King Boulevard. Married in 1895 and continued designing row houses on the Upper West Side and remodeling existing residences and office buildings until his first big break, designing the elaborate banking room of the Slater Trust Company of Pawtucket, Rhode Island in 1904 at the age of 38. And following a devastating fire in the city of Baltimore, he designed an Italian Renaissance style National Exchange Bank of Baltimore and then the National Mechanics Bank of Baltimore in marble and stone, and the furniture. Quote, in this way, the entire building is brought into exact harmony. In New York City in 1908, he designed the magnificent 2-story brick and stone Union Dime Savings Bank on 6th Avenue behind Bryant Park at 40th Street. I've never seen it because it was demolished in the 1960s for a high-rise office building. Number 3. By 1910, he and his family with 3 children had left their Upper 7th Avenue house in Manhattan to rent in New Rochelle when the census was taken. But at the same time, he appears to have been spending summers on the Ridge in New Canaan at 494 Ponis Street, as it was called, in the white Italianate style house facing Frogtown Road. which was demolished in 1997. And I believe that served as the country school's beginners school building in the 1970s. He was therefore eligible to compete in the library design competition. When he won the competition in November 1911, the advertiser wrote, "The design shows that another semi-public, that's besides Town Hall, which was built in 1909, another semi-public building in New Canaan will provide a public ornament. We have not so many of these as we would like, and the completion of this one will add to the appearance of the town materially." Thank you, and this can be continued at another time. I'm still
Thank you,
working
Mimi.
on the research.
Thank you, Mimi. Always so complete. Okay, number 2 on our speaker list is Lisa Milland.
Hi, my name is Lisa Milland. I live at 417 Silver Mine Road here in New Canaan, and I've been a resident of New Canaan for 24 years. I advocate keeping the 1913 library, keeping that facade and then the portion of the existing library behind it. To my mind, one of the most successful renovations and expansions of date has been the town hall. And I think the reason it was so well received was that we kept that facade that so many people considered to be reflective of what our town hall should look like, not only in the past, but also in the future. I advocate keeping the facade of our 1913 library as well. I'm a student of local history. I just finished doing extensive research on American Revolutionary War patriot, Captain Stephen Betts, and we're filming a video at the Historical Society fairly soon about him. I just think that in the long term, seeing that facade go away will make us all very sad. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Number 3, we had Patricia Spugani.
Very good, John. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to address the council. My husband and I were early donors and supporters of the new library. But we may have rethought our donation if we'd known last fall when we gave our donation that the intention was to demolish the library. That information was not really made available until after the fundraiser in the late fall. So I believe that the 1913 library is the most significant public building in town, except perhaps for the town hall, which, as was just mentioned, went through a wonderful renovation that preserved the old while providing new functional space for the town. And just as the town has preserved the town hall through its renovation, we also preserve the storefronts on Elm and Main Streets, and I believe we should continue to preserve the 1913 library. And the juxtaposition of old and new can work very well. It makes me think on the one hand of the George Washington Bridge and the Little Red Lighthouse. Big and the big and the old, right? And specifically when we look at libraries, I've had the opportunity to visit a library in Eastham on Cape Cod. They built a library in 2016, a new building that won the National AIA Award. And part of that award, they were recognized for preserving their 1898 one-room library, which was incorporated into the design of a beautiful new multi-purpose library, which is really a phenomenal building. The space is very inviting. And the old library there was turned into a reading room. And every time I've been there, it's been well populated, it's well used. So we in New Canaan, we have the opportunity to do the same thing in our town. Just very simply, I look forward to hearing the options presented tonight and hope and encourage the library board, the town council, and our residents to consider these options with an open mind. I think the thing that's most important that we do is keep ourselves open for discussion and listen to all sides of the conversation. As a volunteer, many of you know I've been an active volunteer in town for the last few years, particularly with the Beautification League, the Town Players of New Canaan. My mom's a resident at the Inn at Waveney, so I've been doing a lot of work there. And recently, I've come to know some of the other members of Friends of the 1913 Library. I love this town. I think it's a great place to live. I've been here almost 30 years. I live on 352 Marvin Ridge Road. I didn't mention that up front. And I think, you know, one of the things that the best parts about this town is its character, both in terms of the people that live here and the beautiful place that we live in, the town that we live in. And I hope that we can preserve this one building in our town. So thanks for the opportunity to talk.
Thank you, Patricia. Number 4, Janet Lindstrom. Don't see Janet. She may be muted. Okay.
She is muted. Hold on, let's see if we can unmute her. No, I can't.
Is this okay now?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, good. I'm Janet Lindstrom, 231 Sleepy Hollow Road in New Canaan, and I was the director of the Historical Society for 35 years, and have been very interested in the town and supportive of all the historical buildings. And I think that the library is definitely a historical building, and indeed, if I would like to say that I agree with everything that was said before, especially what Mimi had talked about, because Mary Louise King in her book considered the library as an architectural gem. And I think that is true. And we have very few architectural buildings in New Canaan that we could consider as historic. The Town Hall, which was mentioned before, is a wonderful example of saving the older building and still having the new Town Hall. And I think this would be easily done again with the library. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. So number 5 on our list, Betty Lavostek.
Can you hear me?
I can now.
Okay, thank you. Betty Lavostek, Old Norwalk Road, New Canaan, a resident for about 23 years. In preparing for tonight's speech, what I did was I tried to find concrete evidence of what people say about the 1913 library, and I happened upon the plan of conservation and development of all documents. So I could briefly read to the Zoomers and Channel 79 viewers. The rest of Town Council has my document and attachment. The Plan of Conservation and Development, POCD, is a 10-year state-mandated planning document meant to guide growth and development in our town. It identifies strategies to protect important resources and attributes of New Canaan. According to the POCD, for many years, New Canaan residents have consistently indicated that preserving and enhancing community character is important to them. Moving along, the plan specifically identifies preserving and enhancing community character is very important for consideration and action. The intent of the POCD is not to change the character of New Canaan, but to preserve it. This is what residents clearly indicated that they want to preserve, cherish, and love about New Canaan. Before the POCD was planned, I don't know if all of you were here at the time, the town ran a photo contest. They asked the residents, please submit pictures of things you cherish about New Canaan. What reflects this town? And images were sent to the preparers of POCD. what we care about, and what makes our town special. And on page 14 of this document, 2 buildings are illustrated: the 1912 Waveney House and the 1913 library. And to quote the POCD, these iconic buildings are the ones that, quote, they cherish and would like to see preserved. And I agree with what was said. I would love to see this building preserved. What buildings do we have left? What do we care about? Let's come together. Let's try to see what we could do to keep this building and to keep it from being demolished. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Betty. Number 6 on our list, Rose Long.
I am Rose Long Rothbart. I live at 439 Old Stamford Road. I want to thank the Town Council for providing the opportunity for the Friends Consultant to present tonight. I think it's very important for everyone to understand that the Friends of 1913 are not against the new library building. We believe that both buildings can coexist harmoniously on this lot together. It's done all the time. Also, we are getting enormous support for saving this building. A lot of people in town, a lot of New Canaanites really want this building to remain. I'm asking tonight what I've been asking since all of this started, and that is for the library and the town to work with the Friends of 1913 to save this building. In reference to what Betty just read as the POCD indicates, the town should support preservation, and not just for public buildings. It says specifically in there that the town should work with owners of buildings. And that was a question people keep saying, is it public or private? Well, it is a privately owned building, but it is funded by the public, and the public uses it a lot, and it means a lot to the public here in New Canaan. And architecturally, it's a lovely building. So I just want to thank you for listening. And I hope that we can move forward to working together on this. And I think everyone will be happy with the result. So that's what I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Rose. Next on our list, number 7, Christine Seaver, 510 West Road.
Hi, John, everyone. Thank you. My name is Christine Seaver. I am a vice chair of the library board. I'm a member of the building committee for the new library, and I'm also co-chair of the capital campaign for that library, so intimately involved in this process. I wanted to say, as a member of the New Canaan Library Board, we want to convey our disappointment that we've not been invited to participate in tonight's process, which will be discussing our building, our plans, and our property, and that we only found out about this presentation yesterday through social media. It's especially discouraging in light of the cooperative effort in which we've been participating, that facilitated by members of your body, and given the historic partnership we have and that we value with all the town bodies. So we were surprised not to be consulted. We have not been made aware of any part of what's being shared this evening. This is the first time we'll be seeing any of it. So I don't expect we'll be able, in any kind of position to comment. Thank you so much.
Okay, and next on our list, Patricia Oxman.
Hi there, I'm Patricia Oxman. Patricia Funt Oxman, 277 Davenport Ridge Road, which is around the corner from where Alfred Taylor, the architect, lived. The town's character is based on a number of identifiable structures that give it its unique quality. Among the most identifiable structures in our town is the beautiful neoclassical 1913 library, and we should feel lucky to have it. This is a building worth fighting for. It's not easy to speak up and work hard to save a landmark. It takes a lot of time and effort, and sometimes you have to debate with strangers and even with friends you thought would be on your side. Essentially, you have to stick your neck out to be successful. But if you do, and others who share your feelings start speaking up, and you save the building, then people enjoying that landmark in the future can look back at history. They will say that we almost lost this building in 2020, but a group of concerned citizens and town leaders saved it from destruction. We can all welcome the idea of a new library building, but we simply need not destroy one of our gems in the process. The more you look at the 1913 building, the more you learn about its unique history, and the more you see that it can, the more you'll see that it can and should be saved. And by the way, you should never give up hope, because the fabulous Lockwood Mansion building in Norwalk was saved at the last minute. They had already put dynamite in the basement. So it's there's always time if you really want something. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. If there are no other speakers, if there are, speak up, because I've been relying on the chat window. Not everybody has chat. So.
I have tried properly to come through Tom Stadler. I would so love to add just a few brief comments.
Okay, so number 9 on our list will be Charles Robinson, and number 10 will be Patricia Fowler.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So I would give deference to Patricia, who may have been waiting longer than I to comment. Patricia?
Well, I just wanted to say that I live at 40 Dan's Highway in New Canaan. We've been here since 1989. The New Canaan Library is a very special place, and that building is one of the fewer and fewer things that we have in terms of important historical points of reference. And I have to say, with the comment that Christine Seaver said about in a sense, the audacity that we all had to not have them, the library included, since it's about their building, struck the tone that is exactly the problem here. Yes, the library is a building that exists in terms of its foundation and the legal structure, but it's always existed because of the support and people of New Canaan who write contributions, who attend it, who volunteer. The fact that they phrased it, or she phrased it that way, was unfortunate, because it does show the fact that there has not been a willingness to listen to the people of New Canaan. We all want a new library. We're all willing to support it financially and otherwise. But to do so at the expense of the 1913 building without being willing to explore is just really an insult to all of the people of New Canaan who feel pretty strongly about it. There are a variety of things, and I have to think even in the sense of in the private sector. I mean, it doesn't have to be another, quote, town building that's a not-for-profit type version. You could sell it with the appropriate, certainly we have the expertise to have appropriate easement restrictions in terms of change or work on that type of thing. It's a lovely location. It could raise money for the library in terms of it being a private location. Certainly the Vine Cottage, which again, the town bought, was probably a mistake in hindsight. It really probably should have been bought by private sector and with appropriate restrictions and developed, and would have been a tax source of adding to the grand roll for property taxes and so forth. So there are a lot of things, and the fact that they're just not exploring that and not willing to have conversation and continue to say it's their building, they can do what they want, misses the point that it's really New Canaan's building. And until they can understand that and broaden their look and scope, we're all suffering. And I hope that can change.
Thank you, Patricia. Charles?
Thank you, John. And thank you, Patricia. You know, I'm just taken aback by Patricia's comments, which encapsulate all of mine. So where I address you from is tenant Miller's Cottage in Columbia County, New York, on the Claremont Estate, that addresses a natural sluiceway, Miller's Cottage, on the Roloff Jansen Kill. My other home, more prominent, is the Lyndall Fitch Robinson homestead in New Canaan, the second oldest house in New Canaan. And I just can't amplify any more Patricia's comments. I spoke today with Kevin Moynihan. We informed him how economically feasible the preservation and repurposing of the 1913 library is. Only the hubris, only the narcissism of the library board prevents the saving of this building, period. This is economically viable. From a preservation and repurposing standpoint, it is absolutely commanding. Absolutely commanding. There is no reason why our town cannot have both. The two buildings will stand no closer than 70 feet apart from one another. This must be done. There is a commanding voice of people of New Canaan to save the building and repurpose it for good purpose. There is no other reason. Lastly, all New Canaan citizens contribute in excess of 75% of the library operating budget. Why 75% plus? 75% gap, more than 75% because depreciation is included. We pay close to 80% of the library operating budget. It is a fallacy to say that the library board owns its land and operates its building. If town of New Canaan ceased its contributions, there would be no library operations. Please, let's come to a mutually good and perfect outcome with this building and the new Canaan Library.
Thank you, Charles. So next on our agenda is the first selectman's update, number 4 on our list. Then the feasibility study is 5, and then the financial update. Does the first selectman want to give his update now, or does he want to wait till later in the meeting?
It's going to be brief, John, so why don't I go ahead?
Okay, go ahead. Thank you, Kevin.
I'll give you essentially the same briefing I gave to the Board of Finance last week. Good evening, everyone. Good to see you all by Zoom. First of all, just a very brief COVID update. As I said last Friday night, what we're seeing now is an extremely low rate of transmission of the virus within town. The only reports we're getting from the State Department of Health are college kids who have a permanent residence in New Canaan that are being tested and are living at college in many other states, and but they get reported as New Canaan cases. We had another 3 early this week, and actually our health department is going to try to convince the state health department to take these college kids out of not only our numbers but our surrounding towns, because they could impact the analysis as to whether our public schools should remain open, because there's metrics that are determined by the number of reported COVID cases, and these are clearly not. Our health department contacts each student and confirms they are staying at school. So again, that's remarkably where we are with COVID. We're very lucky to have such a low incidence of the virus right now. But at the same time, you know, there's a possibility that the virus is going to return in October and November. So we have to continue to be very vigilant. And the governor has just issued a new executive order about masks and enforcement of masks, et cetera. So we have to continue to follow the safety precautions we have to both at the workplace and when out about town to prevent any transmission should the virus come back through visitors or through people traveling. Give you a couple updates on projects that are going on around town. I signed the contract today to install the combined heat and power plant at the wastewater treatment plant. As you remember, this is a electricity generating facility with natural gas. which will save us the wastewater treatment plant, which goes 24/7, 365, uses a large amount of electricity, and a combined heat and power plant will give us heat as well as electricity and save. We capture the $500,000 investment in about 4.5 years, and we'll save more than half of the electricity that it costs to run that plant. At the same time, we're moving forward with a similar facility at Sachs Middle School, which would be is moving forward and should be done by midwinter. We hope to have the budget next year to do the high school, and these combined projects will give us a lot of electricity savings through the use of natural gas, which was part of the whole expansion of natural gas into town. At the same time, we are proceeding with the solar at the schools. East School is about to receive their solar panels, having a brand new roof put on it. And we're going to proceed to put panels on West and part of Sachs and part of the high school. And so that's all moving forward, and we would look forward to adding more solar to the high school in the future as we attack that big roof replacement. We had a very good meeting last week with Eversource Gas to talk about their plans for the 4th year. Originally, they committed to a 3-year expansion in New Canaan. They are very pleased with New Canaan's receptivity to gas, and despite the fact that COVID slowed down the installation of gas in many residences, they are now completing that and looking forward to further expansion next year in the downtown area, and also hopefully expanding the gas to West School at Ponus Ridge, so that's all, again, they're going beyond what their original commitment was, but they're very pleased with the Canaan's response. As you saw last week, I was very pleased to announce a new leadership for the Office of Emergency Management, with Russ Kimes as Emergency Management Director, and Phil Shively, who has been captain of the the ambulance corps for the past couple of years, to be deputy. And I also want to again thank Fire Chief Jack Hennessy for having stood in for June through August and September, especially through the tropical storm, which Jack did a great job with. Anyway, so we're very happy to have the new emergency management team in place. And we intervened, we applied to intervene into the Eversource electric regulatory proceeding before PURA, which will have hearings in October. We, along with several other towns like Wilton and Westport and Monroe and other towns, which were heavily impacted by the storm and very dissatisfied with Eversource Electric's performance with respect to making safe in the first 2 or 3 days of the storm, and also the communication, which was absolutely horrible, made it very difficult for us to communicate with our residents as to what was going on. And we're hoping that we can get some permanent changes in terms of what Eversource Electric is required to do in a storm, as they had formerly done. And then finally, I am very pleased. On Monday, we welcomed Tucker Murphy as our new administrative officer. Tucker is on here. I think technically she's running this meeting, but Tom is in transition. Tom's going to be with us through October.
Tom's running the meeting.
Tom's running the meeting.
I'm watching.
But again, Tucker is a great addition to our town hall staff, and she made the comment yesterday how pleasant it is to work with the town hall employees, and which was my experience when I first joined town hall. It's a remarkable staff and public employees we have. So with that, I think I'd be happy to take questions, but that's basically my update. I'm sorry, I missed one thing. I skipped over the library. I'm working, as John knows, and John Goodwin, the chairman of P&Z, and the town planner are working with the library to work through their plan for their parking. And they will come to P&Z in October. And I expect to have the MOU back to the Board of Finance in October, and for town council action in November, if not October, but more likely November.
So the first time we see it is when you give it to the Board of Finance. Is that right?
Right. Remember, you made very clear you wanted to actually see what the plan was that went to P and Z before you were ready to commit to the MOU. So, but there's a few things that are still in motion and changing. So when we finally get to a recommended plan and also a plan financing, you will be voting on it probably in November.
By
Having
you,
the opportunity to see exactly what's being presented to P and Z.
okay, excellent, good. So we will get the MOU in November, and we'll get the proverbial ball in November, and that's when we'll start debating it and thinking about it and asking our questions if they haven't been asked already by the Board of Finance.
Right.
Okay. Do you actually think that in the October meetings of Finance and P&Z that they'll actually take these questions up and vote and resolve them?
I think the Board of Finance is prepared to vote. Really, they're going to leave some of the policy issues to you, I think. So.
Okay. Any questions? Okay. Are you going to stick around for the committee reports later on?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, sure.
Okay. So then we'll move right on to the feasibility study, the presentation of the 1913 feasibility study. And for that, I'd like to turn over to Kimberly Norton to introduce the presenter.
Great. Good evening, everyone. I want to thank the Town Council and John Engel for letting us present tonight, and thank everyone for coming to listen. Friends of our 1913 Library, in conjunction with the New Canaan Preservation Alliance, are pleased to announce that a feasibility study on reusing the 1913 Library will be presented this evening. Kirk & Company, a real estate consulting firm from Boston and New York that specializes in adaptive reuse and preservation of historic buildings, was retained by the NCPA to study the market for the landmark 1913 core that the New Canaan Library envisions demolishing to make way for a lawn adjoining its proposed new building. Kirk & Company has identified a library that would be feasible based on its current location, excellent condition, and current and projected demand in New Canaan's local commercial real estate market. Their presentation will include case studies of similar buildings exemplifying successful and economically sustainable reuse of historic public buildings. We hope that you enjoy the presentation and that it addresses the open questions of how the building can be used. The Friends' mission is to save our historic library to create a new future for it. We are in the process of finding a complementary use and design for 1913, given that the New Canaan Library has not been able to reprogram the building and does not want to pay to maintain it going forward. We seek a use that syncs with what has been made public to date about the proposed plans and future programming for the new Canaan Library. The new library is planned to be built entirely outside the footprint of the historic building. In service of our goal, we have invited the New Canaan Library Board and donors to revisit their intent to demolish the 1913 building and urge the Board of Selectmen, the Town Council, and the Board of Finance to condition the approval of the $10 million contribution and proposed parking to the new library to give the Friends and NCPA the agency we need to secure a complementary use and financing for what is clearly a valuable community asset. In reference to the Board of Finance memo, item number 26, quote, resolution of the historic structure. We envision that resolution allows 1913 to remain standing in its current location in perpetuity, and that is written into the library MOU. The 1913 Library is a local landmark constructed from high-quality materials that marks the beginning of New Canaan's Village Beautiful movement early in the 20th century. If built today, it would cost approximately $15 million based on the current cost of construction materials and specialized labor. Rehabilitation of the building is needed to infill a missing corner, remove for a 1979 addition, and update it with new mechanicals, ADA access, and bathrooms. And this can be done for a very affordable cost. The Friends is committed to make this rehabilitation possible and looks forward to the New Canaan community enjoying the building for the future. In sum, our plan is to address 1, feasibility or use, 2, income that can be generated from the building with a pro forma financial analysis, And 3, an affordable plan to rehab the building that is part grant, part equity partnership, and part private donations that would be raised by the Friends of 1913. I would now like to introduce Brett Pelletier, who will be presenting the feasibility study. I just want to give you a little bit of background on him. Mr. Pelletier joined Kirk & Company in 2005 and currently leads the appraisal and consulting process, which includes narrative appraisal reports, feasibility studies, acquisition analysis, and customized market research. He leads a team who focuses on reuse strategies and complex real estate problem solving. Kirk & Company provides clients with real estate valuation and counseling services for all types of commercial property on a national basis, with a concentration on income-producing property within New England. His clients include nonprofit, community, and private developers, nonprofit organizations, institutional investors, lenders, municipalities, public housing authorities, and government agencies. Mr. Pelletier received a Bachelor of Science in Finance from Bentley, where he focused on corporate finance and real estate with coursework in real estate law, real estate financing, and urban planning and development. He holds a Master of Liberal Arts in Finance from Harvard University and a Master of Business from Bryant University. I would now like to turn the meeting over to Brett for his presentation. Thank you, Brett.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you all for having me here tonight and making do with a remote Zoom session. This is to be commended. A lot of municipalities and organizations are really struggling with this. So,
do you need to share your screen in order to show any visuals? Because Tom Stadler could, at this point, make you a co-host if you need that capability.
I don't think that's necessary unless there's specific questions about. I don't have any prepared slides.
Okay.
I figured I would do a short presentation and then allow the board to ask questions. That's usually the best way to deliver this information instead of me droning on and on and on. As much as I love the sound of my own voice, right? So as Kim said, I'm Brett Pelletier. I'm a real estate consultant, offices in Boston, Massachusetts, and where I am right now in Newport, Rhode Island. We are a real estate consulting firm that focuses on historic preservation, community development, and also part of our businesses in affordable housing. But in this exercise, what we really are trying to do is look at historic preservation through the lens of real estate and land economics to try to understand, rather than the premise that all old buildings ought to be museums, creating or understanding the market for an adaptive reuse of those buildings that is economically viable and commercially supportable as a sort of foundation to the exercise. And what I've presented to the Friends and the Alliance is not a comprehensive feasibility study per se of a specific use and a specific profile, but it considers a number of things, including the physical asset, the physical improvement of the property, the market in the neighborhood that it exists in, and its use potential. And I'll just preface this by saying that the building is extremely well maintained and is extremely flexible as far as old buildings go. It does not have a peculiar floor plan or floor plate. It does not have odd fenestration that makes the building unusable. It's not so oddly oriented that it has a challenge for reuse. So understanding the physical asset and how it fits into the market is important. So what I have done is on an initial basis, because this is early days in analyzing this asset for adaptive reuse, I've taken a look at the building. I've spent the day in town walking around and understanding the context in which it sits in the neighborhood and in the community. have reviewed a number of third-party prepared documents, including construction cost estimates and architectural surveys. Taken that information on the physical asset of the building and then applied it to the market and talked to real estate brokers and reviewed regional and local trends in the real estate market, which I probably don't need to tell you is doing quite robust at the moment. New Canaan is seeing a residential real estate market that is very, very strong and is not uncharacteristic of other communities that are outside of central business districts. Lots of communities surrounding Boston are facing very similar metrics, where a lot of people are moving out of the city and finding additional space and fresh air. And it sort of sounds like we're in Victorian times, where people are exiting the cities to the take of the fresh air and the views. But that is what we're seeing a lot of in especially markets similar. This is no surprise to anyone in this room, but New Canaan is an affluent community with strong economics and also a very robust real estate and pricing and volume market. And so those things, in addition to having a robust commercial corridor and a smaller central business district that is very accessible by rail and by regional highway systems, it's a great place to live. It's a great place to be, and I think it's become a great place to work, more so than it ever has been, as people are working from home more or seeking alternatives to larger cities. So we take the physical asset, we look at it through the lens of the real estate market, and then we generally have to understand its use potential. So those two things are combined. We look at the space market and we look at the real estate market and try to understand if this fits within those parameters. And this particular building is, like I've said, it's in very good shape. It's been well maintained, and it is also, excuse me, it's also a building that, like I said, it is a fairly standard dimension. It isn't peculiar. It doesn't have window spacing or bay spacing that makes it inadaptable to a variety of uses. And in my my memorandum that I presume Kimberly will share, I go through a number of scenarios that are quite broad. The options are quite extensive because the building is malleable. It has the potential to support a number of uses that could be all the way from basic commercial office, whether it's a family office or it's a remote office for a firm that has a primary location in Manhattan or elsewhere. It could be an incubator office for a number of different types of users. We're seeing a lot of what is being labeled as boutique shared office or co-working spaces. They're much smaller than the WeWorks of the world. They are more specialized. They're located in markets that would not have previously been considered prime markets for shared office space. And so they're looking for an X factor, and they're often in historic buildings. They're often connected to neighborhoods that would otherwise have previously been not considered as a home for heavy-duty commercial work, proper work. and that's changing. And I don't think, while a lot of what's happening with the pandemic in the real estate market is temporary and will realistically not fix itself, but resolve to a normalized level, that this isn't one of those areas that I think will be flip-flopping back. There has been sustained demand for those types of uses. And so smaller historic buildings like this that are exceedingly well located have been targets for those types of reuses. From that basic commercial use, which could just be let's say it's a family office for one tenant, all the way to a mix of commercial and community or civic use, or 100% community or civic use. There are examples, and I've included some of them in my report, of similar buildings or similar improvements that are able to support an enhanced community use. It's not just a reading room, but perhaps it's got space for local theater groups, or it's a very flexible use for whatever the community needs, really, and that can change from community to community, and anywhere in between. There's really I can't stress how flexible this building appears to be from a practical standpoint, from a use of the interior of the building, and it's very well located, and so that's helpful as well. So, when we talk about preservation and more specifically adaptive reuse of historic buildings, we start with understanding what the problem to be solved is. And the problem here is you've got a historic building that is architecturally, it's historically, it's civically significant. This is a significant building. It's also in very good condition, not just for its age. It is in good condition. It is a well-maintained building. The library has done a good job of maintaining a building that stone is durable, but it needs maintenance, and it's really in good shape. And taking those data points and understanding, is there really demolition? There needs to be a compelling reason to demolish a building that is significant historically, architecturally, culturally, whatever the metric, and understanding why that is. And so that was our task, right? We know that's the proposal is to demolish this building. Is there an alternative within the market that makes sense? Is there a compelling case for preserving this? And the answer is yes. I think this particular exercise is not typical of adaptive reuse scenarios. Typically, adaptive reuse projects are done in marginal locations, marginal neighborhoods, and in marginal properties that are typically subject to disuse, neglect, extraordinary capital need. They're usually buildings that the town or the organization that has custody of it has long since ceased using. And the challenge is finding a creative way to repurpose what is often a white elephant or a very large building that needs a lot of work and doesn't have an obvious solution. Church buildings are perfect examples. They're very hard to reuse. There's spaces in religious buildings that just don't lend themselves to a cost-effective or an easy way of reusing. Certain school buildings are similar. That doesn't apply here. The building is not neglected, it's not disused, it's not abandoned, and it really doesn't need millions and millions of dollars of capital improvement to make it occupiable. It's occupied currently. It's in really good shape, frankly. And so the exercise is less adaptive reuse and continued use. What is a use that could be continued that would support economically and be supported within the community? And I mean a use that would be complementary to not only adjacent neighbors, but the general neighborhood. You know, obviously you want something that fits well, and it currently exists, so that helps with the physical placement of and the siting of the property. So basically, that's my process, is looking at the building, looking at the market, and then coming to some conclusions on its reuse. And in my report, and I can summarize some of the case studies that I've presented, and I've been involved with a number of them. It's less about finding or pointing to a single use or a single program or the scenario. It's more about having the flexibility to find that use. And in all of these situations that I have presented, the use doesn't just float to the surface. There is an active participation component to them, because this building isn't just a privately owned building of a nondescript architecture, and nobody knows about it, nobody cares about it, and it'll sell to the highest bidder, and they'll do whatever the highest and best use of that property is. The civic buildings have an additional layer of complexity to them, and so you have the luxury of finding the best user, finding the best use that works for you. It may very well not be the most profitable use. Tearing it down and building a skyscraper is a profitable use, but it doesn't make sense in the context. And that's the same with reusing these buildings. You have the ability to find what works for you. And I think you have the luxury here of a number of those scenarios being possible. Because the building is in such good condition, the amount of income that would be required to support, even if you used a traditional metric of a commercial real estate venture, to support the debt service that would be required and the operations that would be required, is fairly low, because it is such a small amount of money compared to I think what you would be able to generate. There's a robust commercial market that's admittedly currently in a state of uncertainty, I suppose, but there's signs and indications that things are moving along in normalizing a little bit more as things start to progress and loosen up again. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here, and I can, there aren't many. I talked about some of the creative uses. This is the first is a library of about 3,500 square feet in a community built in 1931, I believe, in a small town in coastal Rhode Island called Tiverton. And it's a very, very similar layout, very similar construction. It was sold to a private citizen who was going to turn it into a residence. And then through some creative thinking and design, the Landmark Trust, which is a nonprofit historic preservation arm of the Landmark Trust in the United Kingdom, there's a US branch that operates historic properties. They restore them, and they operate them as program-rich short-term rentals. So instead of going to a hotel or an Airbnb, you go to this great historically significant property that has this experience as well. They make connections to a lot of different historic and cultural related organizations and facilities. You know, Rhode Island is small, but there's another one in Lincoln, Rhode Island that is nearby the oldest continuously operating blacksmith shop in the country, which when you go stay at this great historic property, which happens to be the oldest stone ender building in Rhode Island, I think, you got to go make a horseshoe at the oldest. You know, so there's an enhanced value add to that. This isn't an Airbnb that's $5 a night or something like that. So it's $500, $600, $700 a night. These are occupied on a 40 to 50% base, so it's not occupied 365 years. It's a really interesting model, and that's just one example. Like I said, very, very similar floor, very similar property. Next is a converted school, which is a little larger. I think it's 1,000 square feet. It's all in Rhode Island, and it's a former elementary school that was converted to a food incubator space. And this a process that involved from the state to the town level, finding market participants that would make this work. It's funded by USDA grants and a number of other things, but they basically provide space, both commercial kitchen, manufacturing, distribution, logistics, cooking classes, the whole package for someone who wants to operate a commercial food service enterprise. So they have people that make jams and jellies and bar sauce and pre-meals and meal delivery services and a lot of other things. That is, it's a unique solution to a problem of a school building that was empty for quite a long time in a very similar situation. And that one was partly funded through some hard, but also some USDA grant money and other types of foodstuffs specific money. The next is right here, right down the street from me in Newport, it is a innovation center, is what they're calling. It's called Innovate Newport, and it's a center for, it's a maker space, but it's also co-working. There is a partnership with, I think it's WorkBar, the national or regional co-working space provider. So there's a lot of flexibility in that space, but it's designed to bring creative talent in one building. And really it's, because we're in Newport, it's focused on marine sciences and maritime businesses. So we have a lot of shipbuilding and yacht restoration trade here in Newport, along with, you know, everything else associated with maritime uses. So that's a creative solution that only works in Newport, right? So there are solutions that really only work for specific buildings and specific markets, but that's what I'm saying when you have the luxury of being creative and finding a use that suits your needs as a community, but also suits the needs of the building, or suits what best works for the building. The last one I'll talk about is a Carnegie Library in Rockport, Massachusetts, which is on the North Shore of Boston. That was almost identical to this. It's 3,800 square feet, stone, built in 1904, and that was sold to a private individual who who maintained almost all of the original interior and exterior architectural improvement, converted it to a single family home. And I think it's currently listed for about $2 million. It's been renovated and updated recently and just went on the market. I think pre-COVID. I think they took it off the market, but it's absolutely beautiful. And so, kind of give you the idea of spectrum from creative arts to single-family homes to straight, plain vanilla commercial office, and sort of everything in between. And a lot of these buildings not only serve a private function as their main intended use, almost all of them, with the exception of the single-family home, have a pub component to them as well. Whether that means a portion of the building is open to public use anytime by reservation, or it means that portions of the building are open to the public for certain events, or there are partnerships with local nonprofits, local communities, and universities to use the space in a more civic natured way, whereas it's not just a single tenant office building where you lock the door at 6 o'clock and nobody gets to come in unless they're a client. Most of these buildings acknowledge that there is some amount of public utility that still exists for a lot of these buildings. And I think that is true of or could be true of the 1913 library. It certainly has a lot of distinct character and space that could be effectively and creatively used by a mix of those participants. So I think that's I think I've yammered on for longer than I probably should have, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And if there's anything that you think I may have not touched on that you'd like to know about, I'm certainly happy to give you my thoughts on that. But I will just close with, this is a first step in a number of steps. Solving complex problems, period, but solving complex real estate problems generally involves marginal gains, right? You're trying to solve small problems that aggregate the larger problem, and the larger problem is the ultimate successful reuse scenario. So we look at these individual points, these individual data points, as opportunities to refine and enhance a plan or analysis to get to a conclusion eventually. And so it's an iterative process. And the main takeaway from this is that there is a robust market. There appears to be nothing that would prohibit, from an economic standpoint or a marketability standpoint, prohibit the reuse of this building effectively and efficiently. And I'm not an engineer or an architect, but the physical asset as well, the floor plate, the layout, the organization also is a positive in that column. That's my qualification, that this isn't the end of the exercise, it's the beginning of the exercise. It would be the end of the exercise if, the building were so peculiar you couldn't end up reusing it. And gymnasiums, for instance, have that characteristic. They're very, very difficult to reuse. We've done it before, but they're harder to find a use for. But so that's my qualification on that.
Thank you, Brett. Are there any questions from members of the council?
John?
Who's that? Oh, there you are,
Sven.
Sven. Go ahead, Sven.
So Brett, just following on your last thoughts, with respect to preserving buildings in New Canaan, so you would say that the library is probably an easier property to find a use for than, say, an old movie theater which has been duplexed?
What do you mean duplexed?
Cut in half.
This way or this way?
Sideways, yeah.
That certainly on its face seems challenging. It's hard to know without context. what a theater cut in half. Basically, I'd say that the more specialized and specific the original use and the original improvement is of a building, whether it's historical or otherwise, the harder.
Think of it as a school auditorium.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. The more specific and specialized those uses were, the harder it is to reuse them. My example was a church building. The sanctuary is hard to reuse. What do you use that for without significant modification? We have seen it done, and we've been involved in a couple that mezzanine above the sanctuary and create a light corridor in the center. So you've got residential housing units on either side in the wings on upper and lower floors. That only works if you've got enough building to do that in. You can put some dormers on the roof line and you've got light and air and everything else. But smallish buildings with specific improvements, especially if they've been significantly modified, are difficult to reuse, but not impossible.
Thank you.
Sure.
Head, Rich.
Brett, in your examples, about how long did it take from the start of whoever owned it before you got involved or before the process started until it was actually completed and put into use?
It varies. I would say on the most simple terms, the Carnegie libraries are disposed of and usually by the town through an auction or they're marketed as a traditional building would be. And I'd say as long as it takes to do the improvements, a year, maybe 18 months to, renovate and install new systems and kitchens and baths and things like that. On the library in Rhode Island, that took a little longer because the developer or property owner was trying to find a partner. He had bought it and, it was still 4,000 square feet in a former library building is quite a lot of square footage for a house, especially if you're keeping in mind the existing partitions. And so you end up with a lot of open spaces where perhaps the library stacks were, or where the main library areas are. And so you don't typically cut them into smaller rooms. And so he was looking for a creative use. So I think, boy, I have the luxury of, it's in my hometown and I was on the town council when we disposed of the property. And that was 2016. And they were supposed to open the property for renters, I think in January, but with, March, with COVID, they have pushed that back. I think they're done construction, but they're opening in October, I think. The other properties, it varies, but I would say with proper planning, the ones that did a planning exercise and went through a creative thinking process, I think Hope in Maine, which was a private individual who raised funds, got partnerships with a local university for the food science and incubator space. I want to say 2 to 3 years from basically disposition to opening the doors. And that was pretty challenging. They had to install an elevator and inspections through the state for their commercial kitchen and sanitary requirements and licensing and a lot of USDA compliance. And it generally takes a little while to, if you're going to use historic tax credits, which a lot of these have, to go through that process on a federal level. The state level is a lot easier. The bar is a lot lower. So, but some of these projects had both state and federal historic tax credits, and so the federal process is a little bit more entailed.
Thank you.
Sure.
Maria.
Are the, like the Innovation Center and the incubator space, are those self-sustaining? Like whoever took them over, they pay for themselves? There's no expense on the town or anybody else?
No, specifically these two, the Food Science Innovation Lab and the Innovate Newport, which is the marine science, were surplus elementary schools that were disposed of through an auction, sold, and I think the city of Newport still has a participation in the maritime, so that they can further maritime use as a political and policy priority, but they are self-sustaining. Yeah. The food science, it's almost like a gym membership, for lack of a more eloquent example. You pay if you've got, Maria's Barbecue Sauce Company, you pay a certain fee. You are able to reserve 3 hours in the kitchen and an hour in the manufacturing space. And it doesn't work 24 hours a day, but darn close to it. And you're able to go in and you make your stuff and you clean up and you get down to the next, and the next person is waiting at the door when you leave to come in. And they also do cooking lessons, and they have a farmer's market and partnerships with community members that bring in outside events as well. So that one particularly, and that is owned by, well, it was started as a speculative venture, and so it is very much self-sustaining. And the goal is to have most of the time in a nonprofit, if a nonprofit is to own or take custody of a property like this, the goal is to reduce the need for a large debt carry. And so you do that through historic tax credits or grants, and a lot of, so the USDA grants, for instance. The maritime use has some grants from, I don't remember where, but I could check. And tax credits that is basically, it's not free equity, but it's equity that is put into the project through tax credit investors that brings that, in a traditional real estate project, you might finance it 80% with debt, 20% with equity. That's typically the other way around on a project that is done with a structure similar to this. You're looking to only carry about 20% of your capital stack with debt, and the rest of it comes from investor equity and tax credits. You're trying to reduce your operating burden as much as possible, because they're nonprofits at the end of the day, and as long as they make enough money to keep the lights on and keep the insurance paid and keep the building maintained and operated, that's all they need to do.
Do you have a good sense of how much investor equity this particular building will need, an order of magnitude?
So it's not, the equity from tax credits typically is a formulaic business. It's as a percentage of your qualified expenses, which are, they're expenses that qualify under various categories of preserving the historic character of the property. So the problem is we can use round numbers today because we don't have a definitive building plan. We don't have a program, but based on the analysis that I've been able to do, and I've reviewed the analysis and the reports that have been presented by, on the pro forma side, and also the construction cost estimate. It's not huge, so if you want to look at this, if you want to back into feasibility by saying, all right, how much do I have to get for a per square foot of this if I were going to use it as an office building, in order to keep the lights on and all the streets, and the sidewalks plowed and the lawn mowed and insurance and utilities and everything else. What would I have to generate in order to meet that threshold and to pay a small debt service? It's less than what I think most commercial office and retail spaces are commanding today in New Canaan. So that's a step in the right direction, right? If it was more than that, you're gonna say, oh, this better be the best office space because I can go, 2 blocks away and get it for cheaper. But the threshold is a lot lower. It's I would say in the teens to $20 per square foot versus $40 or $50 that some comparable properties would be commanding. Like I said, round numbers because it's today and we're looking into the future, maybe 2 or 3 years. It's also, we don't know exactly what this building would look like when improved that way, but we've got some estimates and we can kind of squint and say, all right, that wall goes away and that part of the building goes away and we put a wall here and it's certainly.
And in this presentation, in the report that you're providing, are there case studies that give us a roadmap of how other municipalities, such as Newport, handled this? Who owned it? Who contributed? How much? What kind of use? Are there several case studies that we could look at to see an example of success?
Yeah, I think there are 5 case studies, 5 or 6, and there's varying degrees of detail. Like I said, the majority of these have been properties that were surplus. And so most of the motivation of the community is, I don't want it. You do whatever you want with it, but get it off our books and get it off our liability for maintenance. And so they don't really, they don't often participate aggressively in those. So it's usually either leased or most often it's a 99-year ground lease or it's a sale, but oftentimes they're very similar to this where they've got complex land issues where it's not a defined parcel in itself. And so it's easier just lease the property to a nonprofit that can then generate a tax credit revenue, a tax credit equity, and operate the building basically. In some of the cases that I've worked on, towns have, said, well, we're mowing the lawn next door anyway, we'll mow this as well, all the way to actively they've got 2 or 3 members on the board of the nonprofit and actively finding users and tenants and things like that. It really, you've sort of got the whole spectrum at your disposal. There isn't one way that works. There will be one way that works for your community and for your property, but there's no universal formula for that. Some of them have had, extraordinary levels of private donation, and some have had no need for private donation. It's been done with a private investor. It really depends.
Thanks. Anyone else?
Yeah, Brett, it's Tom Butterworth, have you looked at potential constraints resulting from parking issues? Or did you leave that to the side?
Yeah, it's an important question to ask, and it's an important answer to get. I have the scope of my analysis doesn't include a definitive parking analysis. It really depends. The scale of the parking would depend on the ultimate use, certainly. But ordinarily, and this is true of almost all real estate with where choice is prominent, the users of space will not choose to use space that doesn't suit their needs. So when looking at this, one of the first things that we looked at was neighboring uses. You think, okay, well, is a retail boutique perhaps a good use? And you think, well, that typically requires both foot and passenger car traffic. And if I'm a retail store owner, that's not the location I want to be in, right? It's walkable, but it's it's not near all the other shops, first of all. And if I'm going to try to generate a lot of car traffic, if the site is constrained in that regard, I'm not going to want to be there. And so ordinarily, the use or the user sort of self-selects out in most real estate markets, right? If the site doesn't suit my needs, I'm not going to go there, right? If I need a drive-through window for a Dunkin' Donuts and the parcel is in a place that you can't even get to effectively by car, I'm not going to place my drive-through Dunkin' Donuts at that site because it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't suit my needs. And so there's a self-selection component to that. And most of these properties don't fit the mold of current zoning requirements for parking. And so there is a negotiation as part of the planning process and the land use process to figure out how you're going to solve those problems. They're generally not insurmountable, but they are, you do generally have to get creative. Almost all of the buildings that we work on were built either prior to automobiles being relevant or existing entirely. And so they've never considered automobile parking or traffic. And so you do, users and municipalities do tend to get creative in how they're going to solve the parking issue, whether that's a shared arrangement or it's street parking, as a way. There are a number of ways that I've seen it solved effectively.
If there are no further questions, I want to thank Brett for presenting.
Sorry, John, I have one.
Okay, go ahead, Robin.
You mentioned the historic tax credits. Aren't those only available for buildings that are on the historic registry?
That is a condition of the federal historic tax credit program. I'm not an expert in Connecticut state SHPA requirements, but presumably that would not be an insurmountable feat. It's typically a step in the process, no matter if you're looking for state or federal credits.
I'm aware of properties that aren't designated that do get state credits.
Great, perfect. I know in Massachusetts and Rhode Island's let their state credit expire, but in Massachusetts, it's it's all the same process. We have a particularly strict state credit process. But I defer to Connecticut experts on the SHPA requirements.
Steve, I guess, are you last but not
Yeah.
least?
Yeah, Brett, if you could, I don't know whether you have the presentation in writing, but it'd be great at least to get us whatever you have. It's a great, basically it was a 30,000 square foot or 30,000 foot look at the 1,300 square foot building, but it'd be nice to see us. We've got to be able to drill down a little more specifically. So anything you can give us that is more specific to this actual project would be helpful.
Sure. So we've got, and I will say that I've got it's an executive summary. It's about 12 or 15 pages long, talking about conclusions and whatnot. And then there's some appendices that have economic data and some other things that would support that. I would say, again, it's iterative, and so we can't draw too many refined conclusions on a blurry canvas, so to speak. We got to start. A decision needs to be made on footprint or on actual square footage or what part of the building is preferred for X, Y, and Z. So to make sure that you're applying your metrics to what you should be applying them to. So to the extent that's typically what happens next. You start to refine, say, all right, we've got a definitive building area, and here's what we want, here are the priorities of the town or the community, the neighborhood or whatever, and you start to refine so that you can actually hang some pretty strong metrics on these. But I think there's enough data in here that can help you contextualize that with regard to the actual 1913 library.
The ratio
That's
of
good.
something to nothing is infinite.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
The ratio of something to nothing is infinite. Please forward.
Thank you, Sven. Okay, if there's nothing further, we'll move on to the next bullet in our agenda. Thank you, Brett, for
Thank you
coming.
very much.
And thank you very much, Kim, for bringing this to our attention and commissioning the study. With that, we'll move on to financial update, Lunda Asmani.
There we go. This will be fairly short. I sent this out via email a couple weeks ago. I think, no, not a couple weeks ago, last week. But there's 3 items just to kind of go over. One was the question of how are we doing with property taxes given the extension, the deferral that the town council approved on taxpayers. We're trending really well. We've so far, there were a total of 86 tax units that received exemptions, and therefore it's not a lot compared to what other communities in the state experienced. And therefore, year-to-date tax collections are where we would expect them to be, even without the deferral. So as far as cash flow, we're doing well. I know initially there were some concerns. Would we need to go for temporary financing just to cash flow our annual budget, which won't be the case. Our expenditure burn rate is about $13.5 million per month to get us average through the end of the year. And with the tax revenue that comes in and the fund balance that's available, we are in very good shape in terms of cash flow. The other thing that you would have noticed on the dashboard that I sent out are conveyance fees. Those are trending extremely well. And John Engel, it kind of corresponds to some of the data that you've been sharing with us as well on housing and real estate. And so that is not new information, but you recall that for this is a 3rd successive year where we've actually been budgeting a decrease in conveyance revenue. And this year we actually budgeted less than last year. Again, we had budgeted $1 million total for the year in conveyance fees. The first 60 days, we've already collected $530,000 of that. And so within the first 2 months, we've already exceeded 50% of conveyance fees. Now we do anticipate we'll have some losses in parking because of some of the revisions that we've done in terms of providing grace for those. So I think the increase in conveyance fees will buffer any losses that we incur in some of the other revenues. And therefore, all in all, the revenue picture is looking positive. Nothing out of the ordinary on the spending side. COVID expenses, we're still incurring those and submitting those for reimbursement this year. Year to date, we're at about 50,000 or so. We've kind of went through the big hump. The initial expenses all occurred last fiscal year, and therefore the level of COVID expenses we're incurring this year is a lot less than what we've seen last year. And we've already submitted that for reimbursement through FEMA and CARES. And so we anticipate getting some of those expenses back. And then finally, we're closing out FY20 fiscal year. It looks like the net revenues over expenditures over the year, the fund balance would probably come out on the positive by about $800,000 or so when we close out the year. But we'll get the final numbers when the audit is complete. And that's really all I have as far as a financial update so far. It's still early in the year, so there's not too many trends to share at this point.
Wait, that means you think we have $800,000 more than we thought we'd have?
No, actually, we are going to add $800,000 to the fund balance at the end of the year. You'll recall that when we budget the year, we actually budget for uses of fund balance to make up shortfalls. So it's it's a swing of over the 800,000. I think this year we had budgeted a $3 million fund balance drawdown. And so instead of drawing down 3 million, we're actually adding 800,000 to that. And that's largely driven by reduced expenses at the end of the year due to COVID, with the town being shut down. The Board of Ed also had reduced some expenses, which they're going to come back next month possibly and make some additional requests. But there was a substantial decrease in spending the last quarter as a result of COVID, and that's why we're coming in underspending. And then on the revenue side, they were not as impacted by COVID because our primary sources, property taxes, January and July, we had already received those when COVID hit last fiscal year. So those were not impacted by COVID.
Wait, so now it got even more interesting. So it's not an $800,000 difference. It's a 3 million, somewhere around the order of magnitude of $3 million. So I have to ask, is it because those expenses went away or because we delayed them? We delayed the projects.
Well, these are general fund, and so this does not include any capital projects. And so there wasn't any delay of projects that are impacting this number. However, on the...
For example, I know that the state said early in COVID, you will not do anything that is not essential. And so I'm asking if people like Tiger, not capital projects, Tiger, delayed projects, or did those expenses truly go away?
On the general fund side, those expenses truly went away. Any delayed projects, those would be impacted on the tax-supported capital, which is not the general fund, and on the bonded capital. There was some of that, but that is not what's attributing to these financials in the general fund side.
And can you extrapolate based on those elimination of expenses due to COVID that we're going to have new expenses this coming year, or are you going to extrapolate and say, no, many of those decreased expenses will continue into the current fiscal year?
I can work with the departments to make that, to run some reports and get some analysis to you on that.
Not willing to tell me now.
No, I don't know. I'd have to check.
Okay.
I'd have to check into it, especially on the operating side, because most of the operating sides, you still have your salary costs. Those didn't go away. I think on the Board of Ed, they are able to, because of the nature of what they do, we can probably do a better job of measuring any delayed and foregone expenses that are going to come back. On the town side, on the town operating side, not so much. On the capital side, yes, there were some projects that were delayed. There were some projects that we did in June because things started to opening up that we probably would have had those projects done in April. They were just being delayed, and some of those are taking place in July that typically would have hit last fiscal year. So you will see those. But then those are on the project side that have already been appropriated. So it's just the cycle of expenditures and not new expenditures.
Linda, what was the general fund balance as of the most recent date that you've measured it?
Let me see.
Oh, roughly.
Yeah, roughly.
28, 29, I think. 28, 29 million.
Kevin, don't spend it all in one place. Give it back to the taxpayers.
Linda, what do you estimate the June 30th close balance to be? I thought it was closer to 31 million.
Let me see. That's what I was looking at. I'm looking at the unassigned portion of that.
I thought we estimated that we were going to close the year in the low 20s, right? Was that not what our target was?
Well, that was assuming had we drawn down the fund balance, but I think in June and July I made some presentations to you that was estimating closer to where we are now. I have that number right here.
I remember the debate at the Board of Finance where they were debating taking it down from a 25 to say a $20 million fund balance, and they decided to split the difference, I seem to recall. So I thought it was in the low 20s.
John,
So-
that's for next, that's for this year's budget. We're talking
That's
about
for this year's budget for June 2021.
Okay.
So right now we're roughly looking at an unassigned fund balance of $31.6 million that we will end the year with. And of that 31.6, $4.5 million is budgeted to be drawn down for next year's budget.
Got it. That's helpful.
Man's right. According to my notes, on July 14, he said 30 million bucks.
I'm confusing my years. Last year, this year.
Well, John, you're booking so many transactions these days that what's another $30 million here and there?
Any other questions for Linda? Okay. Is that the end of your presentation, or are there more?
No, that's it.
And so remind me, what projects did we delay on the capital side, since you haven't mentioned it, are coming up first? Are we doing a bridge? We're working on a bridge, right?
Oh, Waveney, Waveney and the library are the projects that you haven't taken up that are on the current capital plan that was. And we're talking about bond resolutions and appropriations, correct, John? Is that what you're asking?
Right.
Yes. It's two projects, the library and the Waveney.
And when do you think, what months do you think those will be ready to come before us?
I'll let Kevin answer that.
We're talking about bringing the Waveney House in a reordered priority back in October to the Board of Finance.
Okay.
And the library, you know, it depends.
Also in October.
October.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Anyone else? Rich, finance guy? You're muted. Okay. I guess Rich got nothing. Okay. Thank you, Linda. Excellent presentation. Good news. Healthy finances. And that brings us to the final agenda item, which is committee reports. And we have updates from committees. And the first committee is bylaws and ordinances. Steve Carl, I think you had an ordinance subcommittee meeting, but I couldn't find how to get in. So did you have a meeting today?
No, nothing
Okay.
today.
All right. It popped up on my calendar and I was looking for a meeting that wasn't happening. Okay.
You're always
Anyway.
looking for a meeting.
So what's going on with bylaws and ordinances? Are you working on anything? I think there was something to do with tax relief for the elderly. Were we recently reevaluating that or thinking about that, or has that been put to bed again?
No, I think that was put to bed, and Penny had handled a lot of that. Currently, we're just coming off of summer, so we haven't really met and tackled any new ordinances. I'm unaware right now of anything that's, you know, really hard pressed right now. So we'll be active again once the fall gets underway here. So right now we've been very quiet, so nothing to report.
And so this would be an appropriate time for you to point out to me that proposed ordinance on for sale signs, real estate for sale signs, no longer needed, maybe in 2020.
Yeah.
Not working on that anymore.
No, it's very smart. Sometimes the smartest ordinances are the ones we don't pass.
We didn't do.
No.
Right. Okay. The irony is not lost on me. Okay. Conservation, Robin Bates Mason and Rich Townsend.
Well, at the Conservation Commission meeting, they just went over about the Green Lake Trail, which is in Bristow. It came in under budget at 115,000. The budget was for 150, so they're going to look to dredge the pond now rather than in the future, as well as do additional fence repair and move the entrance of Old Stamford Road, move the entrance to Bristow Old Stamford Road. They're working on water testing, and also the Friends of Bristow fundraiser for Bristow is currently underway for $10,000 match by Sustainable Connecticut, and they've raised $7,765 so far. They have 29 days left, so they're looking good.
Are we still trying to be part of Sustainable Connecticut? Are we trying to get certification?
We've handed in, our application went in August 25th. They're doing the review, and we'll find out October if we get it for this fall or if we need to add some more and go and try to get certification in April.
The town-wide certification?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Wow. What do you give our chances? Good?
If we don't get it in the fall, we'll definitely get it in the spring.
That's great news. Great progress. Thank you for leading that effort. Any other questions for conservation? And do you want to comment on, well, maybe people weren't paying attention, but I think the Conservation Commission asked for a pollinator project in front of Parks and Rec, and it was not passed. Is that dead, or it's moving somewhere else?
No, so that was a plan put together by Keith Simpson Associates when they, the additional money from Sustainable Connecticut was the thought to put part of the pollinator pathway, some native plants in the island in the parking of need near the apple cart. It was voted down by Parks and Rec. The concern was maybe kids would run to that area to look at the plants. There were safety concerns, there were concerns about wasps.
Is that dead, or is that moving or being revised?
No, so what we'll do is that they'll just probably move that back into Bristow.
Okay. No further questions. Let's move to education, Butterworth and Naughton.
Maria?
Well, I just listened in on the Board of Ed meeting, and the year started off great. Parents are happy. There's not too many kids doing online learning. Most of the kids are going in. There's no transportation problems. And this first phase ends September 23rd. And they move into the second phase, hoping all things are going as well as they're going. One thing I did at the Board of Ed meeting, I wanted to update the town council. On Monday, the Board of Ed voted to officially codify that the Board of Education would be delegating curriculum to the administration. And I just want to give you a little update. There is a state law that says Board of Eds must establish a curriculum committee. In New Canaan, our tradition, I guess, has always been to allow the administration to sort of run this committee. But in 2008, it became a law that the Board of Ed has to establish it. So I actually, before getting on the town council, filed a FOIA complaint, because if it is a Board of Ed established committee, they should be following FOIA and holding meetings in public and allowing the public access to the conversations about curriculum. You know, we know curriculum impacts everything: courses, electives, programs, training needs, professional development, subs, whatever. So my complaint with the FOIA Commission said that our Board of Ed committee is not following FOIA. The district's position is that they have delegated it to the staff, so now it becomes a staff committee. They officially voted on that on Monday. Before that, that wasn't the case. In the end, the commission, because the meetings are not noticed, the complaint did not contain the date of a meeting that was not noticed. So the commission basically couldn't make a ruling. So they wouldn't even take it up. So the next step is I do have a date of a curriculum committee meeting. I basically have to refile to find out if this Board of Ed established committee that's been delegated is subject to FOIA. From what I understand, because the Board of Ed is a public agency, and by law, they're the agency that's been charged with forming this committee. So whomever they delegate this task to should also be subject to FOIA. So this is what the FOIA Commission will have to rule on, whether or not this committee should operate in public with minutes, agendas, et cetera. And, you know, in New Canaan, I stopped counting at like 30 committees. They all follow FOIA. So I have to say, I really believe most people in the town are interested in the curriculum that takes place in the school. So that's probably a really important committee to be transparent and public. So I'm waiting to get a date to see when the commission will take this up and tell us, you know, how we should be operating.
It's not something that the town or the town council has any involvement in, right? You're not suggesting this is just a point of information for us, because FOIA is a state-run thing, and the Board of Education gets their authority from the state. So there's nothing we can do, right?
No, and I think it was probably misleading to say it was town councilman filed the FOIA complaint, because I technically wasn't one yet when it was filed. But the thing is, I have to see it through to the end. And yeah, it's a FOIA commission that has to make the decision. The town council, you should know about it. I mean, it's important. You know, curriculum, it affects everything. And it's just like textbooks. You know, the Board of Ed technically is supposed to vote on textbooks. And I believe there's a reason for that. You know, this is money and transparency. And, no, I think we just need a ruling on it once and for all.
Oh. Can you give us, you or Tom, give us a financial report? How are they doing financially? Do we have any idea on how much money they're going to ask? Now that they know how much money Linda has, how much of it do they want? I know they have COVID related expenses. Have they given the town an accurate estimate yet of how much they are?
No, I don't believe they have. Linda would know, of course. They don't have a final number yet, do you? They're going to bring one to us in October.
Right, and they've been talking with the Board of Finance as well. I think they're going to be making a presentation to you and the Board of Finance in October with those numbers. I believe the process that's been recommended to them is by way of special appropriation. So whatever that dollar amount is, they'll bring it to the Board of Finance and that number requested. A number will be approved by the Board of Finance, and then by following the special appropriation procedures, it'll be advertised for, I believe, two weeks at minimum, and then it'll come to the town council for approval, what that dollar amount is. And so
I know that the Board of Education and the administration was concerned in August, and we didn't have a meeting, so we didn't get to discuss it while it was still a concern. But they were concerned that the wheels of government would not be able to move fast enough to make these special appropriations, and it would put them under some kind of strain. Are they more confident that the process is going to move fast enough that if it goes to the October meeting and is voted on, and that we take it up potentially, I guess, in the October meeting, and there's the 2-week notice period, that's fast enough? Because I think we offered to host special meetings if it was necessary and convene the town council and Board of Finance on an ad hoc, on a special, emergency basis, if we were putting them under some kind of strain. I never heard what the final answer was on that.
Well, they've accepted the reality that it's not going to happen until October. One of the things that's uncomfortable with that is that they're spending money that they don't have. There's no item in their budget for this. So basically they're robbing Peter to pay Paul in the interim, and they would love to they can't wait to get to the moment where it's confirmed that we will actually pick up these costs. think the Board of Finance has effectively said that, and we haven't really been asked.
Said what?
Said that if the costs are in the range of what carried over from last year anyway, which I think was 1.4, 1.6. Is that what it was, Linda?
No, 400,000.
No,
400,000 is what was initially approved.
400 was approved, but they actually had 2 million that they saved because of COVID.
No, but I know, but they didn't get that, Tom. They asked for it, but the Board of Finance.
That's the point.
But what I'm trying to say is that it felt like the 1.6 was in the ballpark of what they would need for reopening, even though that money's not in their pocket. If you want to put an order of magnitude around what they're going to ask for, I think the latest thing is it may be a bit more than that. But when you think of reimbursements that are going to come, because apparently a lot of it is reimbursable from the state or the federal government, that it's in that order of magnitude. It may be somewhat more, but once you net out the reimbursements, it's in that ballpark. But I don't think they'll have a precise number until they come to the October meetings.
Right. And what we shared with them at the Board of Finance was that initial concern that there's robbing Peter to pay Paul. That's not exactly the case, because they do have a $90 million appropriation that they have. And so the money's there. One, within their own appropriation, but then two, the town also has reserves. That's how we do capital projects, when we incur and then we bond after the fact. So what we're doing here is not unlike our process throughout with other expenditures. And so I think the only thing that the Board of Finance was concerned was they wanted to provide them a number that was enough, not too little, not too much. And so the Board of Ed felt like by October they would have more solid numbers than they had last month. But the funding is there, and the money is there to incur. I mean, there's money in the bank. They're not going to write checks that are going to bounce because the funding hasn't been approved by the Board of Finance. So I think that concern was somewhat relayed to them as well.
No, I understand that, but I think one of the things that they're not accustomed to dealing this way. In other words, those expenses have not been approved. They have not been appropriated. So there's at least a theoretical possibility that they're going to have to reduce other expenses in order to cover this if it hang till the end of the year. I know you're comfortable, Board of Finance is comfortable, but it's not the way the school administration is typically operated. But anyway, they're over it. We're going to solve it in October, and life will go on.
I just thought it was very, very important that we discuss it now, because there is a time sensitivity to this. They do have an expectation that we're going to debate and vote quickly. And if we don't debate and vote quickly, it just adds to their anxiety. So I can't have any town council member in the October meeting say, $1.6 million, that's crazy. I need more information. And you know what? It's incumbent upon each one of us to go get that information now. Go see Linda, go see the Board of Ed, but be prepared that they're going to ask us for money, and be prepared with your questions, and be prepared to vote, because we said that we were going to commit to moving quickly on their appropriation questions. So,
John, just to clarify this, I don't think you're properly characterizing what the Board of Finance said, because they said they want to continue to monitor it, and they wanted the Board of Ed to come back to them, would tell them where they were. But as Linda said, they have a $90 million budget. They won't have a shortfall until next May or June at the earliest. And Todd Laviolette made the point, they could very well have savings like they did the last quarter of last year if athletics are not going on. So,
I understand all that. I'm not mischaracterizing it, but they would, if they've overspent against their budget, and they have a risk that we don't approve some of these things, then obviously they would have to reduce other spending. They can't just show up in May and say, well, we didn't plan for this.
Yeah, but don't expect a special appropriation request in October. It's not going to happen.
You don't think they'll ask for it?
well, I don't think the Board of Finance is going to give it to them based on what they said. They're going
That's
to
a different question.
They're going to monitor November. They're going to monitor December. And
Okay.
if by April they think they need a special appropriation, Board of Finance has said they'll make sure that they don't get into a cash crunch at the end of the year.
Okay. I guess what I'm saying is that we don't have to be ahead of the Board of Finance, but we have to be ready that when the Board of Finance has made a decision, we have to be ready to make our decisions quickly. That's all I'm saying. Right, Tom?
I guess. You're right. You're right, John. I hope Kevin's wrong, but.
No, just watch the Board of Finance meeting, Tom.
Yeah,
I watched it.
John, I think one of the things you said that the Board of Finance will see a lot of stuff before it comes to us.
Right.
And if we monitor that appropriately, we will have most, if not all of our questions answered. I mean, I believe the reason Todd and the Board of Finance said they weren't going to approve what the Board of Education asked for is it was not particularly specific, and they wanted more of $1 million blank check that they could just spend as the situation evolved. And I think all Todd said is, I can be fast enough to evolve with you, and I'd like to see what it is before I approve it. I mean, get the Board of Finance meeting in July. That was the basic, that was one of the big deals that happened.
And we're saying the same thing. We want specifics, and we can move fast if asked to move fast. That's all.
Exactly.
Okay.
Can I ask a question? I mean, doesn't the Board of Ed normally do transfers within accounts? If one's not being spent down, they can create I mean, first of all, can they create an account that's called COVID or whatever, and then pull out and do transfers? Can they manage it without even asking for additional money? I'm just curious.
They can spend $90 million however they wish to.
From where, where did you get that money to transfer into a COVID account? If you were
from what hasn't been spent, that electric went down, other areas that they just didn't even spend, right? I mean,
well,
you're correct, Maria.
They would like to get this solved before budget season begins. And they'll have the specifics, I think, at the October meeting. So, I understand what Kevin's saying. We could make him go right down to the last month and make him feel nervous for the entire year. If we want to, but they will give us the numbers.
Okay.
Anyway,
Health and Human Services. Penny, Liz.
The tax relief program numbers are in. We did some increased PR on the program this time around. And it attracted 9 new individuals, but with the drop off of a couple people who did not qualify this year, 4 deceased and 1 person over budget, it ended up with 6 additional people total on the program, to the total of 57 applicants. The increase in tax relief went from 85,000 to 104,000. So I don't think that the additional PR did get the information out there. I think perhaps the program is not as needed with perhaps the size that in people's minds we thought perhaps was out there. I think we're reaching the people who need the program. There were 2 who requested tax deferral, and that's about, it's been historically 1, and this year it's 2. So I think we're doing what we need to be doing.
Penny, can you tell whether any of the numbers that you're looking at, how they were affected by COVID economic problems? Or
I don't have access to that information. That would be confidentially discussed between Health and Human Services and the tax, assessor's office.
But the numbers you're talking about coincide with the COVID period, so
Well, sure,
they could have been impacted by COVID. Whether they were or not, we don't know.
could have. But, that's, confidential information that, the tax assessor's office would, protect within their knowledge base.
As long as we're talking about tax relief and we're talking about $30 million, $31 million unassigned fund balance, maybe this is not related, but I do know that the federal government and the state government put programs in place, early in COVID, for relief. And a lot of that relief is long since expired. And I found out about a New Canaan citizen last week who was let go from her retail job in New Canaan because retailers are not doing well in New Canaan. That's no secret. And they're laying off people or they're reducing their hours significantly. And I found out that this person, and I said, how is this person surviving? And the answer from her friend was, well, she's going to the food bank a lot. And I thought to myself, well, I wonder if we as a town need to step up, if there's anything we can do to step up and fill in the gap. It's or food bank, which is probably strained, or any of our other doing it through our charities. I don't know what is the most appropriate mechanism, but I do know that New Canaan citizens are suffering and we don't have the programs in place. So if any of you have any ideas, maybe this isn't the appropriate forum, but if any of us have any ideas, or maybe this is the appropriate forum, I'd love to hear your ideas on what we could do to help people through this second half of the pandemic.
John, I think that we do have programs in town, and Health and Human Services has increased their publicity about food bank needs, and are dealing with individuals as they become known to the department.
So is it double when you say is making it known? So it's we really need to do a really good job of making sure that these people who are probably finding themselves in a position that maybe they weren't in last year or the year before, maybe they've never visited the food bank and aren't aware. So we have to publicize it to the citizens. And then we also have to publicize what does the food bank need from those who can contribute, right? We need publicity on both fronts, but I think this goes beyond just the food bank. I think that citizens are probably suffering in many diverse ways that goes beyond the food bank. Their fuel heating bills as we go into winter, paying their rent.
And those are their programs available through Health and Human Services for that.
Okay. Does Health and Human Services have enough money? Because they wrote their budget before the COVID.
Right, and they also have emergency funds available to them through Community Foundation grant.
Okay, so they have enough, you think, at this point?
I don't know that they have enough. I know that there are programs there.
Okay. As you see, I know even less than you, and so I'm asking these questions out of complete ignorance, but
right.
It just seems to me that the world shifted under human services feet and under the feet of our citizens, and and we're not talking about it daily at the 4 o'clock call like we used to, and so I just wondered whether I don't know, these people have been.
John, unemployment benefits were extended at a $300 federal subsidy on per week rather than the $600. So that program has been extended for many weeks.
Okay.
That's new though, Kevin. That 300 is just now coming into play.
Yeah, but it's backdated to when the original one ran out. So
Is it? Or I think it's only August.
Well, but when the other one ran out July 31, I think, so it's backdated till then, so people.
Okay.
Yeah, it's
Yes, right.
retroactive.
Only about 4 or 5 weeks worth of aid. And John, I do also think your point that there are a lot of people who may be impacted today that never saw themselves ever being in this position and may not know where to turn. And so I think it is, as Penny noted, we do have a lot of good programs in place in town. We have fuel assistance, we have rental assistance, we have some property tax assistance, but we have to make sure that the people who suddenly find themselves in a tough financial spot know about these programs.
Right.
The Health and Human Services staff, I mean, Bethany is awesome. And, she goes out of her way to make sure that when people come to her, that she does everything she can to help them. The question is, how do we drive them to Health and Human Services if they're not aware? And that's
right.
That's a good point.
John, perhaps Kevin can do an update on that when he does the COVID update once a week. He can add Health and Human Services as a way to reach out if anybody needs help.
I mean, I was happy to hear in our local media about the parking, that the free parking was extended and that they weren't going to, go ask the citizens to, renew their parking permits that they weren't using. And I thought, okay, that's proactive. That's good. That's a creative solution, instead of just business as usual. And I just wondered if there are other asks. And so I think that was a great idea, and I applaud that. And I just wonder, are there other things that we could be doing? Yeah, and so I guess we should all give our ideas to Kevin, and he can update, help publicize this during his calls. If there's nothing else on Health and Human Services, we'll move on. Okay, infrastructure, utilities, Christina and Penny.
We haven't had a meeting since the summer, so more updates to come up unless Penny has something she wants to add.
No, I was just going to say that Kevin gave the update on what the Buildings and Infrastructure Selectmen Appointed Committee discussed this past week. So that was the summation of that meeting, and I don't know that there's really anything other than what those topics were, Eversource, natural gas, and solar projects. So I think Kevin really, covered the territory on that one.
Okay. Can I ask, Kevin, since you didn't mention the northwest cell tower planning, is that still moving full speed ahead? Are we going to get a tower in the northwest of town? And then we're already at the siting council and it's in their hands on the northeast, but are we working forward on a northwest to get an emergency services tower up there?
We'll have some news soon on that, John.
Okay. I know you said soon last time I asked you. Okay. Land use and recreation, Robin and Maria.
We
No, nothing.
Yeah, we haven't met. I can just give an update of what happened at the Parks and Rec meeting, if you want that.
I watched a little of it, but yes.
Okay, well, the first thing was the pollinator pathway was voted down. There was the fall adult tennis clinics have been sold out, so they're doing well. The Waveney Access Road is alleviating pressure from South and Farm. So that's been good for the morning commute with the kids. They're talking about a gate going in for the access road, but they need to determine when it will be closed during that time. The walkway at Dixon Park has gone in, and the superintendent report was just that there are lots of trees down from the storm, especially in Waveney, and they're still working on those.
And they talk a lot about lifeguards.
Oh, yeah, at Kiwanis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very controversial. How many lifeguards? 3 lifeguards, 4 lifeguards?
I think it was 3, not 4.
Right. That point was made. Thank you.
I have a question. I have
Go
a
ahead.
question on land use. Robin, is your committee following the potential discussions about the changes in local use of land through planning and zoning and the proposed proposals that may come through in January, February, that those decisions are made at the state level, not at the local level?
You know, we actually haven't met since the summer, so we're gonna have to meet up and go over that.
Can I suggest that you do that, because it's a pretty significant vulnerability from a local zoning and our ability, you know, as a municipality to have those controls taken away from us. Okay?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good point, Penny. Thank you. Public safety, Liz and Mike.
Hi. So fire commission meeting, just nothing new. It's pretty quiet in terms of nothing, no wild developments. A couple of statistics I thought would be nice to share. So in August, the fire department had responded to 261 calls for service, 66 of which were for flammable liquid spills, power lines. They had 103 alarm activation incidents. I thought it was surprising 78 of them had to do with the alarm systems malfunctioning. So the folks out there may want to, consider having service to their alarms so the fire department doesn't have to respond to a malfunctioning system. The firefighters are well underway with their being updated on their training. They had, sorry guys, 252 hours of training this last month. A lot of it have to do with COVID updates. So our staff is being as diligent as they can with COVID training. And that's pretty much about it right now for the fire department. For police, let me pull my notes. Sorry about the dog barking. I'm here by myself and no one can handle the dog. Oh, okay. The department's 2% under budget for this past year, which is good news. Car larcenies are up. That's a huge year-over-year increase that they've experienced. And the chief wants everyone out there to continue to be diligent. And hold on one second. I apologize. My wife's working late, so I'm on my own with everything right now. But yeah, I just wanted to note again on the car larcenies being up. As I said, the chief really wants to continue to have great awareness for people to lock your cars, put them in the garage at night, because it just seems to be a huge rash of incidents. There were cars that were recovered up in Hartford. I guess there's a car theft ring operating in this area. One of the cars recovered up in Hartford was a New Canaan car. Also, this is the other one I found interesting. There's been a fairly large increase in reports of suspicious activity, whether it just be a car they've never seen in the neighborhood or people walking around they haven't seen or things of that nature. Could be a number of different reasons for that, the chief said, but important to have people to continue to be vigilant. So when they do see suspicious activity, report it, because that can also be a crime deterrent, especially with car larcenies. I thought that was something to keep in mind. Collections on false alarms. I know the department is working with the finance department to increase their collection of false alarm fines, which I think is about $10K outstanding right now. The other thing the police are doing are updating their safety protocols now, or safety policies, in light of recent legislation that was passed and signed into law by the governor with respect to, I think, outlawing certain physical restraints that the police can no longer use. So the department's well underway in making sure they're complying with the new law. And finally, according to the police commissioners, they are underway in selecting people for the building renovation committee. And that's it.
Do you mind if I talk for a second about the fire truck, since I've had questions?
Yes, please talk to us about fire trucks.
So the question was, like, hey, what's going on with a rescue truck? And so the answer is that the what's called the chassis, which is the chassis, the drivetrain, wheels, transmission, engine, and a raw cab, are due up at Gallons and Knight, the builder, end of the month, beginning of October. The truck committee is going to Gallons and Knight to do a pre-build meeting and make sure that we've got all the I's dotted and T's crossed before somebody starts cutting steel or aluminum, and expect to see the truck in the spring. And just a huge shout out. I think all the emergency first responders did a hell of a job during the storm. It was really good to see.
Okay, so I want to make 2 points. One, that were just because they were agenda items. The Friends asked us if they could present tonight, and I got two differing opinions from the town council. One was, why are they presenting to us? We don't have a decision in front of us. And another member of the town council said, absolutely. We have many questions. The town council hasn't really taken up the question of the library yet. And I have a lot of questions, and this is part of that process. So I thought it was appropriate. Nobody else objected to having the presentation. And I said, I think you should make the presentation in a public forum of the study you've commissioned. I understand that certain members of the library said, that they should have been consulted, but that's not the job of the town council. The job of the town council is to provide a public forum for things that are of interest to the town council, and it is, and things that are of interest to the public, and it is, and allow the presentation to be made. But the intent was never to debate it or vote on it. We'll do that, as Kevin pointed out, once we get the MOU and the Board of Finance and the Planning and Zoning have gone through their process. So if any of you wanted to, comment on that to me now, I'd like to hear it, but I just thought it was appropriate and it was timely and it's of interest to the public. So we added it to the agenda. But I can see that some people were upset that it was added to the agenda. Okay, the other item that was asked to be on the agenda was there is an important speaker series going on in New Canaan community on racism. And the members of the town council were invited to sponsor and support that series. And I asked Penny to investigate and go talk to the people putting on that forum and find out, whether they wanted to participate and promote that series on racism here at the town council meeting. And they decided that they didn't want to make a presentation. And Penny and I just decided that it was probably unlike the 6 or so nonprofits that are sponsoring that and promoting an education series, that it's probably not the business of the town council, a policy-making body, to start sponsoring education series. So that's why it did not appear on our agenda. But many of us support it individually. It just wasn't a matter of policy for the town council. But so that's where those two agenda items came from and how they were decided. So just thought I'd discuss it with you in public since I can't discuss it with you all privately. Are there any things that you want to hear put on the agenda in the coming months? We've talked about getting the MOU in October. I've heard from at least one of you, Rich Townsend, who says, when are we going to hear about things like Waveney? And I think we got our answer tonight that we're going to see that at the Board of Finance, it's going to start getting discussed in the October meeting. But are there other questions besides, Waveney and the library that you want to see on our agenda in the next couple months?
John, someone just texted that channel 79 is muted. They can no longer hear sound. I just wanted to say that.
It's nothing I did, I promise.
I know. I know it wasn't you.
Okay.
Just before we continue. I don't know.
So is there anything else that you think members of the town council find pressing and that we should talk about? I will put this out there that several members of the town council have asked me, why can't we take a look at the draft MOU? And I think that's a fair question. You don't have to answer it right now in front of us all, but I just need to let you know that several members of the town council think that that we need more time with the MOU than to just get it at the conclusion of the Board of Finance. So when you release it to them in draft form to debate, consider releasing it to us so that we can study it and review it and investigate it.
Yeah, John, when the Board of Finance gets it for deliberation, it becomes public, so you'll have it then.
Okay, so we'll get it in advance of their October meeting. Is that right?
Yes, probably.
Okay, good. So those of you who asked about that, you have your answer.
Is there no town council input into the MOU at this stage? Wouldn't you want to have all of those questions discussed as in the formation of the MOU?
We've had input from John and Rich.
But not lately. We haven't met, in all fairness, in a couple months.
We haven't done anything on the MOU in a couple months, John.
Okay, well, letting everybody else know that there's been no movement on the MOU by Rich or I, and now I'm learning by anyone else either. Okay.
Hey, John, can I bring up two things that just to go along with the finance side of this? Is the library did put out a bunch of information and data in response to the Board of Finance. Didn't quite answer all of their questions, but that's available to you. And so if you want to study something, it's really quite interesting. And I think they've given a lot of response to things that were asked, and it would be helpful to get ahead of that. The second thing is in the Board of Finance that happened this week. There was kind of a debate about how whether we would actually have the budget letters from the Board of Finance setting targets for people, etc. And it was debated, and I thought it was an interesting debate. One party was saying, well, we didn't make them follow it anyway, so what's the point? Why are we spending our time? And it was interesting. I think it was decided they're going to continue to have two people that work on setting a budget letter. Needs to come out by the end of October. And Michael Chen has been put on that duty. And I think Chris Labrie is still on it. I think George resigned is what happened.
Actually, George decided to stay on.
Oh, did he? Okay, Kevin. But in preparation for that, I know Michael Chen very much wants to understand the objectives that all of the major funding bodies have, which would include Kevin, it would include Brian Lutzy, and it would include us. And so I anticipate that we will be being asked, so what do you think should go into this letter? What do you think the major budget policies are that you would be interested in seeing the budget follow when it shows up at the town council? So we will attempt to have a subcommittee meeting to discuss exactly that. And see whether we could actually put some input into the budget letter. It needs to be done, of course, by the end of October to be effective as people actually get started on their budget. But I thought that was one of the important things that was discussed in the committee meeting.
Oh, that's exciting. I think that's great. I know that we always take a great interest in the letter after it gets published. I think it's fantastic that Michael Chen is asking if we have any input based on our experience for the last couple of years on things we'd like to see in the letter. That is great. When do you think you might convene this subcommittee?
Well, we have to convene it within the next week or two in order to be any good at all for the next finance committee meeting.
And do you think it might be a Zoom committee meeting? And what time of day do you think?
We could do it that way. And if we want to get participation, I think we probably need to do it at night. I know Michael is going to be going around in the next week or two as well, talking to Kevin, trying to talk to Brian and get their input. So I think we should be ready for him to solicit our input. I think we should have a Zoom meeting in the next week or two to be able to provide that to him.
We should have a Zoom meeting.
I was discouraged to hear that people bring up that they thought we shouldn't have a budget letter. I think nothing has helped more in the last 2 or 3 years than the budget letter.
Yeah.
Regardless of what the result was, the kind of conversations it brought out, it was very, very important. So I hope the Board of Finance does not get discouraged on their impact, because I think it has a tremendous impact.
I agree, Rich.
I do too.
I agree.
John, are we
A
going?
little secret. Greenwich is always ahead of us, so we get the benefit of seeing what Greenwich is doing before we do.
It's good we got a leader.
John, will we be having a joint meeting between the Board of Finance and Town Council?
On that question or generally?
In general.
Did we last year at this time?
Yep.
Yeah, we did it after elections.
Oh, you mean the great big, the four-way meeting, not just the two of us.
Yeah.
The Board of Ed as well, yes.
I think it would be a good idea. Do you all want to see that happen again?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's necessary.
Okay. There's 2 votes. Okay. Well, if nobody objects, then we'll have one of those. Yes, I will organize that. Now that Kathleen Corbett is on the Board of Selectmen, and she's always been a big fan of that meeting, maybe I'll reach out to Kathleen Corbett and see if we can put something together. Unless you would like to organize it, Kevin. I mean, you are in the hot seat. Would you like to organize the joint meeting, or would you like me to do that?
I'll be happy to, John.
Okay, you'll do it? You'll pick a time and date and all that?
Sure.
Excellent. All right. See? Delegated right there for selectmen. Love that. Okay. Anything else? Do you think you'll do it after the election, Kevin?
Of course.
Well, I mean, we don't have anybody, in our boards, we don't have anybody running this year, so it doesn't really matter.
No, I know, but I just think October is going to get very busy with preparing the budget guidance, and so it'll be better if people have something to discuss
after the election.
Right after Thanksgiving.
Okay, perfect. All right, so now you all know you're invited to the big joint meeting.
Wait.
After Thanksgiving.
Kevin just said after Thanksgiving?
Well,
no.
We really don't have a good handle on the budget until we start meeting in October, November. So, I'd rather have something to work with than just
something to talk about.
Yeah,
I think that's a good idea.
I mean, think if we have the Board of Finance letter and we have the reaction from the Board of Education, we have something to talk about in that meeting. Absolutely. Right now, we don't really have anything to talk about. Okay.
For example, right now, the number is going to be skewed because the Board of Ed is coming in at $1.6 million under their budget from last year. And so they have to go back to their norm, presumably, which is going to be not a 6% increase, but a 15% increase to get to next year. So the numbers are going to be skewed because of the effect of COVID on the last quarter of last year.
They're going to argue that it's not, because if you go back to normal operating, then the numbers that were agreed upon last year are then going to be the ones that probably are going to be in effect.
Well, then you have the whole issue. I mean, is given where we are with COVID, are we even going to be talking about school start times next year? So.
Right.
We may need more than one of these joint meetings. I know that's a lot to ask, but I mean, there's probably a lot of stuff independent of the letter and independent of the Board of Education that we could be talking about with respect to our budget. So I don't know, maybe we could have some smaller joint meetings before the big meeting. I don't know. I'll talk to some of you about it. Is there anything else? It's 9:41. Shall we adjourn. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Christina moved, Carl seconds. All raise your hand.
All hands go up.
Okay, they're all up. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. See you next month.
Be well.
Good night.